So this week we're talking about ethics and more the legal side of counseling, and how do we teach folks to teach like future counselors around all that. And let me simplify it. Like, how do we get folks to like recognize the legal kind of aspect of things while also balancing that with like the ethics? And maybe I'll kind of center us on two things that come to my mind, right? So in Colorado, and for folks kind of watching from other places, it might be different in their state, but in Colorado, it is now a complicated complex in terms of at what age can you consent for services. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've seen this in your ethics. I heard it was 12. Well, I heard it was 18, right? And like, I don't know about you all, but for me, like, we can go into the law and let's look at the law, but can we take a step back for a second and really ask, like, what is the right thing to do? Like, is it truly right to kind of remove a family from the treatment, right? Culturally, knowing how like intertwined different clients are with their families, to just view that person individualistic, is that even a good idea, right? And so I just kind of see folks kind of like see the law and then think that that is like what we should do. So I don't know, what are your thoughts as I bring up that case, and how do we get folks to recognize the importance of the law and to balance that with ethics and get our students to hold the complexity of all this?
I can't bounce on that. You know, the law says 12, right? Fine, the client can consent to therapy at 12, but who pays for therapy? You need to ask ourselves that. The confidentiality piece also is something that needs to be dealt with carefully. Have the client, you know, removing the family from the session, to me, I don't abide to that, because even though you're viewing your client as an individual, your client is an individual within a system. So if you don't work with the client and also to help them work with the system that one way or the other impacts what's going on, then to me, I feel you're doing the client a disservice. Because one, the client still goes back into that same system that dysregulates or adds to their problem, and you're not bringing that system into the session, might not really help the client. So we need to think about, okay, confidentiality. When should the family be brought in? Especially when the client might be experiencing some difficulties or engaging in some harmful behavior. So do you want to keep the family out of that?
So that's a great example of like where the law might back you in, seeing someone without the parental consent, and you're starting to talk about the systematic kind of implications of all that. And I think I just, again, this is why I'm a fan of Dr. Kemi. They're just like the complexity you approach everything with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that brought up something. Experience years ago working with an Islamic couple, and it is not culturally acceptable for me to see her privately. Her husband would have to be there, and the other part of it is about how to honor confidentiality. And I'm trying to remember how I handled that. I think I ran out the room screaming, but I think ultimately it was really just about letting them know what the parameters were and what maybe things can't be shared in here. And I struggled with that. I don't have a real answer to that. But again, these are some things that do come up, and I'm going to have to think about that one for a minute.
But we have to teach our students, like, you're going to be the one to have to make the decision, and there is not a clear way to do this. Like, because I'm just thinking, right, that's a great case you just brought in. And on the flip side, if you were saying, okay, so I won't see them separately, here's a question that I also don't have the answer to. Can you truly assess for DV if they're together? Can you? You know? I'm not going to answer that, but, and I think this is where, for me, I'm trying to get students to a point of like, we might end up in different places, but it's about how we justify it and the process we went through to get to our answer.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I think going off of that, I feel like the rationale part is so crucial in how can you you get to this conclusion, but it didn't just come out of nowhere. It didn't come out of a vacuum. So like, what were the steps that you took to get to that conclusion? Because laws change, and just because it's a law doesn't make it right. And I think that's a kind of an internal conversation with your own values and how you want to show up as a counselor. And when you're teaching that, I think that that's really complex and scary maybe for students to kind of grapple with. And so going back to that piece of how are you going to get there? What's your thought process to get there? And I think so often in these sorts of situations, in these kinds of dilemmas, it feels like it's more you need to make a decision kind of right now, when there's actually, very often at least, there's a whole lot more time that you can take. So to slow it down, to seek consultation, to kind of go through your own process. So often there is that time, I think, to be able to slow down before you make this kind of whatever the decision you come to, but then to be able to be okay with the rationale and the steps that you took to get there. So again, like that process, as opposed to this is, CRS, and this is how you apply that, instead of that really being able to go through the process of it.
And ethically, I think there is, that kind of brought up something is just, as you go through this program, you're going to meet different people, and how important it is to have referral sources, somebody who knows how to, that works with this specific community. So yeah, that's kind of what that came up for me, is just that a referral process is also very much a part of the ethics of what we do.
Yeah, and to add on to that is documentation. Like, what's your documentation process? I bring up in my class that if it's not written down, it never happened. So it now becomes your word against the client. And if anything comes up, the first thing they're going to request from you is your documentation, because that's the evidence that shows that, okay, this session took place and this is what happened in the session. And also picking on that is the mandated reporting issue. This is what the law says about child abuse. And cultural piece also, talking about discipline. Okay, you see a client, let's say you see a client comes to session one day and maybe the child is playing rough and throwing some tantrums, and you see the client smack the child. Do you report that as a child abuse or not? Those are some conversations that you need to have internally, that, okay, what does discipline look like for this culture? And is this an abuse or not? What do I report? What don't I report?
And I think if you go into it with this like lens of like, well, I want to make sure that like I'm following the law. That like you're like really making sure that like you don't get punished. I think that's what I'm trying to say. If you go into it like, I want to make sure I don't get punished, I think that's the wrong perspective. I think you got to embrace the complexity. You have to embrace like how hard this is. And then if you're just following like, how do I make sure that I stay, I guess, as legal as possible, even though we should, right? That you're almost just protecting you and not looking out for the best interests of your client, right? And folks watching are like, did you just say not to be like legal? No, be legal. And I just want folks to recognize how complicated it is. Well, good convo as always, and we'll pick it up again next week.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Joe.